is much more palatable. And the web interface is powered by Path Dispatcher. But we're running into a problem where if you want to see a ticket, it's different from trying to update a ticket. And that's not quite encoded in the URL because it's a REST interface. So we have the get and post directly in the URL, and that's really ugly, and I don't like that at all. So I had to figure out a way to distinguish get and post, and that required making Path Dispatcher smarter. So one thing we did was we made it so you can have metadata associated with each path. So one type of metadata might be the HTTP method that was associated with the request. So you could say if it was a get, then do this. If it was a post, do that. And it's pretty easy to pass the metadata into the Path Dispatcher system. It's a little bit ugly, though. It's a lot of typing to get the different get and post behavior. But obviously, it's Perl. You can refactor it any way you want. Is that reasonable? I don't know. I actually think this might be more reasonable, where you just have get, and then the path, and then the code, as opposed to this, where you have a comma and this spurious on keyword. So I think this might be the best. And it's not that much code to support it. It's not built into Path Dispatcher, but if I make a specific Path Dispatcher web interface subclass, then it might be provided for you. So that's all you need to do to integrate Path Dispatcher with Plaque. So when Plaque gives you the path, it's just in the request URI environment variable. And then Plaque provides everything else in the environments. So I would say Path Dispatcher is pretty PSGI compatible. And you don't need something like this where you have PSGI specific knowledge in your generic dispatcher. But it's probably just like 3 lines of code, so I should probably just do it anyway. Because it is a bit nicer than that, I think. Next up, tab completion. So Jesse likes tab completion. I like tab completion. So it's pretty much a no-brainer that we would want tab completion in Path Dispatcher. So there was no question. One thing that's kind of interesting is with tab completion, you might have many different levels of rules going on. So you have help, and then underneath that you have a bunch of different subcommands. So you need Path Dispatcher to kind of understand that, and it does. The only thing that might be weird is the ticket summary format on the right, but I think that's just provided by SD for you. And to implement tab completion, it's not that much work. You have if you have a rule that's a string, that matches a string, then you can obviously just look at that string and kind of figure out what the rest of it should be. But this is internal to Path Dispatcher. You don't need to write this code yourself. So with Path Dispatcher, you just get it for free. You don't need to. You just say something like this, and automatically you get tab completion. You have to hook it into your shell, but there's no way around that, really. All right. So like I said, Path Dispatcher is pretty object-oriented. We have a lot of rule classes, which let you match in different ways against a string. So you might just match a particular string using the EQ operator, or you might have a regular expression match, or you might have dispatch match, which is the thing I said earlier about extending Profit's dispatcher, where you have some other dispatcher and you kind of forward requests onto it, and then they get the results back. And I grade out the ones I don't really use much. Intersections, like if you have 2 rules and they both match, then it works. Chain is something from Catalyst, I think, and someone else contributed to that. I don't understand it. It's kind of strange. But since we have all these rule classes, it's pretty obvious that you can write your own. And it mostly just works. So you can create your own rule classes with their own specific behavior. And they're domain-specific rules. So they you can pretty much do whatever you want. So like in SD, we have this rule for matching record IDs. And the way that works is you just say, when you have a partial record ID, look it up in the database, and then go from there. So obviously this is not something we can implement directly in Path Dispatcher because it's very SD specific. But it's something you want, right? You don't want to have to enumerate all of the... When your user hits tab, you don't want to have to look at the database and read every single ID and then go from there, because that's what you have to do if you're doing it without domain-specific rule classes. So it kind of works out very nicely. And similarly, match is pretty straightforward. So it's pretty cool. These are simple only because it's simple to do this stuff in SD, but your rule classes can be as complicated as you need them to be. There's no reason that they have to be 2 lines of code. So there's a problem with the API that's been bothering me for a while, and it's when you populate $1, $2, there's no easy way to do that except by matching a regular expression. So the way we do this internally is we match a regular expression. Though we don't want to match the regular expression the user provided against the string that the user provided, because that might take a while. So instead what we do is we construct a regular expression that matches just the $1, $2 that you want. And we construct a string that matches it. And then we do it. So that should be pretty fast in pretty much every case, because there's no backtracking, there's no exponential behavior or anything crazy like that. So when I was at YAPC North America giving a talk like this, I asked in the audience, does anybody know another way to populate $1, $2 without matching regular expressions? And I said there probably wasn't one. But then Chromatic said, what if you just assign to the globs? Because if you just say $1 equals foo, that throws an error because $1, $2 are read-only. But if you say *1 equals foo, then that works.
I think I saw a patch that might pull that from 14.
Okay. That's okay for me because it turns out that I have a better solution, but good to know. So you can do something like this. You just say star and then the number. And since it's a symbolic reference, we have to turn off strict refs. Oh, I guess you have to include the backslash because glob syntax is just really ugly. But there's a small problem in this code, in that it can have action at distance effects, where it strangely replaces the $1, $2 values outside of the scope of Path Dispatcher. So that's kind of a non-starter for me. I don't want to have your code broken. So what we can do is we can say local inside the for loop. But it turns out that doesn't work either. So when you have local inside the for loop, Perl rewrites it for you because it has to initialize $_. So what happens is it sets up a dynamic scope for $1, then the scope ends, so the dynamic scope disappears. And then by the time you do that for all the variables, then you run the code. Everything has its previous value. So you've probably written code that looks like this before. We have an if statement as a postfix modifier of a local assignment. And that works just fine. But this doesn't. You'd expect both of them to work or neither of them to work, but it's inconsistent. It's because Perl has to initialize $_. It's kind of unfortunate. So the way I'm going to solve it, the code is there, I just need to release it and fix backcompat, is pass the match object, which is something Path Dispatcher has for inspecting matches, directly to the code reference. So that way you can just call methods on the match, and that way you don't have to use $1, $2, $3. I'm thinking that the way I'm going to fix backcompat is the specific sugar layer that Path Dispatcher provides is going to assign $1, $2 for you. But the internal core Path Dispatcher is going to be just something like this. So I think that's a nice solution. It turns out that every time I've had a problem, making the code more object-oriented actually fixed the problem. I guess it's the layer of indirection thing, where the only problem that I can't fix is too many layers of indirection. And finally, that gives me a convenient way to implement named captures for 5.8. So when you have a match object, you can do whatever you want with it. It doesn't have to comply with any sort of standard Perl behavior. Well, that's whatever. Anyway, that's a brief overview of Path Dispatcher's problems and the way I've overcome them. Most of them have to deal with Perl itself. Just dealing with the language, and also the specific design issues that we need for the code. So that's it. Thank you very much. Anybody have any questions?
So my question is about the tab completion. How do you integrate the tab completion with the shell?
Good question. Okay. So in the documentation, we have a snippet of code you can just put in the right directory. I'll show you that real quick. Okay. So it's in the documentation. The way it works is we install a specific dispatcher rule that is only for the shell's use, because we need to initialize the dispatcher in order to determine what the rules are. So it gives you everything you need. Okay. And Z shell comes first because that's what I use.
What was everyone?
Everyone who's anybody.
Cool.
Okay. Thank you.
はい、ありがとうございました。